I started working on enlargements in 1970 from the old school technique from Avard Fairbanks, who uh, went to the Beaux-Arts in Paris in 1912. And I, unfortunately, am one of the last people to be in direct contact with the school of my generation. I fear that a lot of these things are being lost. Now, saying that, I have made a living off of working with foundries and helping them do their enlargements prior to computers. And I've seen people really struggle with the drapery and use devices like chicken wire only to create messes that will stab your fingers and cut you not knowing where it's been cut and embedded. One of the best items to support clay when you do drapery is a chain. This is old school, old world Italian French technique of using the clay and of using chains with the clay. The chains will also help you achieve nice parabolas, and you can move it around with great ease. Water-bound clay will always work in your favor. One of the reasons why people use foam enlargements on their enlarging is the cost of the plastilina clay is so obscenely expensive nowadays. So you often find sculptors skimping on the clay for a matter of economy and just putting a thin layer of clay over the foam. Well, that's really not clay modeling. That's kind of putting a layer of clay on top of the foam. Even at the enlarged state, you want to be able to have control without having to dig into the foam. If you have to throw a hammer into the clay and bend it back or move it forward, that's what you're trained for as a sculptor and as a professional artist, is your eye, which the computer at this point cannot really discern. People are paying for your judgment. And for instance, on a scale this size, I always like to add about an extra half a head length, even a whole head length to the legs, just to give it a sense of elegance, which a computer isn't going to do. Water-bound clay is a very stable medium in itself. So it's to your advantage to use plenty of clay. It's stable, it'll support itself, and it helps you learn to work fast, which is part of the economy of the whole thing and being able to make a living at it. Also, it lends itself to making a waste mold that when you pull the plaster off the clay, you pull the clay apart, any clay that sticks to the mold, you just hose out with a hose and soap. I found it useful to speed this section up so you can see how the clay is applied to the chain and how easily it can be moved around and manipulated. I hope you enjoy this section. I wish I could work this fast. To decide literally means to cut. When you're absolutely sure that you don't need this chain in there anymore, or that piece of stone doesn't have to be there anymore, it's the sculptor's job to decide where to cut. It literally means to cut. I think as a sculptor or artist, we should be interested in symbols, not merely signs, but entire symbols. Our life is made up of symbols. It's our job to understand the mythology behind these symbols. Mythology being, as Alan Watts would say, a model of thinking, as though a balloon with dots on it could demonstrate the theory of the expanding universe. This is what a myth is. According to Joseph Campbell, he said, myth is the fabric that holds society together. Perhaps now we are in need of a greater global myth, or more localized myth in our neighborhood, the mythos. But these are things I'm constantly toying with. I worked with the father in the Greek Orthodox Church about 20 years ago on trying to understand the iconography of the Greek Orthodox Church. And he said something quite profound. He said that they worship with all five senses: the sense of smell, the sense of hearing, the sense of touch, and taste. You go in, you smell the incense, the beeswax on the candles, and the whole thing becomes an experience of all five senses. Same is true with the Eastern religions, as Hinduism and Buddhism. Some of the more primitive religions in the Amazon around the world tend to use all their senses. This is what has me concerned about the virtual world, is we're working with a sensationalism and not the senses. What would happen if we got a blast that stopped all of our computers? What kind of society would we be? What kind of people are we without our computers and our devices? What have we left behind that others can see that we've done with our time? Are we just merely waiting for the Grim Reaper to come along and take us and just entertain us? Nothing, life is just fatuous? I don't know. I'd like to think that at least something I've done with my hands at the end of the day, my effort might account for something. I miss my home, the home I grew up in. My dad was an artist, and our home was filled with artists. I could come in as a young lad and sit with artists and listen to their conversations, talk about drawing and painting and sculpture. And if that wasn't enough, I knew plenty of artists I could go and sit in their studios. And I think I learned more about art through osmosis than by any learning of any schools I attended. The thing I enjoy about art, visual arts, is being able to see the sense of the artist's touch. When you can see the tracks of the chisel, or the clay that was left looking like clay, like Paul Trubetsky's work, where it's just bravura. I think what the word I'm looking for is bravura. Not to be overworked, just learning to let it happen, and where it's just good enough as it is, right there. Leave it alone. It's done. It's baked. Bravura. I love bravura. I see an overemphasis of people trying to overwork their work to death. Bless Relaxes has been a journey. It's been through several iterations. My first rendition of Bless Relaxes was in 2002, I believe, 2003, right before the war with Iraq. I felt in my mind, in my heart, that going to war in the Middle East was premature. The enemies too decided too quickly. 16 years later, what have we learned? We have made enemies throughout the globe. We lost the sympathy that we had on 9/11. Now we're experiencing all types of blowback, political unrest. The nation is more divided than ever. And have we learned anything? For this reason, I think it's time that we bring Bless Relaxes back, a new iteration for this day and age. It's a way of looking at ourselves as a community and as a society. In 1941, Hitler had occupied Paris. A group of preeminent philosophers and scholars met in Paris. It was called the Lectures on Hope. One of the lecturers was Gabriel Marcel, who did a lecture regarding stating that why had we come to this as a society? Why are we? The question among the scholars was, how did we arrive at this juncture? And the conclusion was that we couldn't look in the mirror and not see the Medusa. We could not face the mirror. Erich Fromm, after the war, coined the term malignant narcissism, a type of narcissism that was terminal. I believe that when we take a position that is irretractable and we believe is irrefutable, we have fallen into a sense of narcissism. The other guy is wrong, we're right, without really looking at the deeper issues. I think that right now we need more self-examination as a society and a community than ever before. The title of the show at the Pulaski is A Summer of Love. I think of love, I think of agape. And of course, the whimsical and wonderful theologian Martin Marty, who coined the phrase sloppy agape, he used to say, "You Calvinist and your sloppy agape." And of course, Richard Alpers, aka Ram Dass, coined the phrase for the modern American Buddhist, "You sloppy bhakti." So regarding the issue of love, I think we need to have a re-examination of our common sense. There, of course, there is unconditional love, which is what I have with my family. And there are conditions of love. I'm not a great spiritual master, but I like to read spiritual people and wise people. But to say that there is not betrayal from other people is to be naive. If you haven't had any betrayal or treacheries, you will. Just wait long enough, you'll have friends betray you. Do you continue to love them the same way? I don't think so. I hate to think that the free love, the summer of love, 1967, 68, isn't all lost. Somehow I think we as people like to point the finger at other people and shame them. Like, I recall in the 70s how people loved to point their fingers at Richard Nixon. They were full of love except for Richard Nixon. So there are limits, there are terms and conditions to love. But how we do love to blame the other fellow. We can see the most evil villainy in other people. But like Carl Jung said during the trial of Adolf Eichmann, unless you can see his own darkness and wickedness in you, then you don't have a chance. We all have that deep darkness in us. And so I think coming to love is coming to terms with who we are, a real self-investigatory. Upon the Temple of Delphi is the words, know thyself and nothing in excess. Knowing yourself is a painful process. Carl Jung said, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid their facing their own soul. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Carl Jung. In order to see the truth in the world, we need to see the truth and stop lying to ourselves. Only by then we'll know what to do and how to act upon it. From the Marriage of Heaven Hell, the Proverbs of Hell, by William Blake. He says, damn braces, bless relaxes. We are facing a time where people are accusing each other, bitter accusations being thrown about. That's damn braces. And as we throw these accusations towards one another, we are bracing. I'm right, you're wrong, they're wicked, we're not. All of that is a matter of self-reflection. We need to really come together as a society, as Lincoln said, the better angels of our nature. We need to unite. We need to relax. Give the other person their space to be right, and you be right. And thus both just relax and let's see where this goes in a little while. But when you brace, everything seems to fall apart and crumble. And I think to relax is a wisdom, and in wisdom is love. That's philosophy, the love of wisdom. I'm just kind of rambling now. But I do think that we need to take a look at our darker natures and bring those out. Know that we can't get rid of that darker nature. But we can take a look at it, say hello, and then put it back where it belongs. But if you keep trying to repress it, it's going to manifest itself in some very ugly ways. This is just part of my message.